Who Gets to Decide? A liberty-based podcast that brings a little piece of sanity to a confused society drowning in a culture of craziness. And here is your host, Seth Martin.
Well, all right. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Who Gets to Decide. This is Seth Martin, your host, and this is episode 637. Thank you for joining me this evening, or day, rather. Glad you're here, and always happy you're listening. In case you missed it, which I'm sure you didn't, there was a lot of media attention to what Trump was saying at Davos at the World Economic Forum. And mostly, I didn't find too much of what was being said there very interesting. One of the things I noticed is that the people there are kind of rolling it back a little bit. They were talking just recently, like last year, the year before, very assertively about the world's going to be this, you'll own nothing and like it. And they had all these, especially during the Biden administration, just a lot of pronouncements. And Trump is really, I think, maybe another positive thing Trump has done is really kind of rolled back this globalist view that the WEF has been trying to get us used to. You know, they've been water dripping us with this idea of one world government, or, you know, some sort of one world elite structure. You know, we've seen some pushback on the WHO. We've seen some pushback on the United Nations. We've seen pushback on the IMF. Almost every global organization you can think of, there's been dramatic pushback against. So I think that's a very positive situation that's happening with the World Economic Forum. None of the other stuff was very positive. In fact, it was kind of scary. They seem to be very happy to get rid of, you know, a huge number of human beings on the planet and have machines run everything while they, you know, waller around in their wealth. And that's very dystopian and, you know, not in line with individual liberty or the freedom that we talk about here on Who Gets to Decide. So I think that's a very positive kind of thing that's happening there with the WEF. It seems to be rolling back. Now, having said that, there wasn't very much that was very interesting that was being talked about. There was, you know, Trump mentioned, you know, he's developing a peace board. I think he's trying to drive a wedge into the United Nations, which I think is very good. The United Nations is corrupt. It's a way for the rest of the world to try to have a say about what happens in America, and somehow we lend or transfer our sovereignty, you know, to this global governance kind of idea, which I think is very bad for America. It's very, very bad for your average American, just people like you and me. So I don't like that. I'm glad that I don't know what's going to happen with this peace board. I don't know if it's going to come of anything. I don't know anything about it. Nobody does, really, at this point. But I thought that was interesting. But really, you know, Trump, what he had to say, you know, specifically wasn't that interesting. It was just a bunch of rambling like he normally does. But I thought this interview with Jamie Dimon was a little bit interesting. You know, Jamie Dimon had some things to say about just a lot of things about Trump. You know, it's funny, the reporter here, she's from the Economist magazine, and she's trying to get him to say negative things about Trump, and she more or less accuses him of being afraid, you know, him and other corporate leaders being afraid to say anything negative about Trump. Now, Jamie Dimon, you know, he's been in this job for a long time, more than 10 years. And I think if you're going to run a big bank like JP Morgan Chase for more than 10 years, you're a pretty smart person. And you're not, I would say that your opinions don't change with the wind blowing. That said, I don't like the banking industry. I think the banking industry is corrupt. It's a cartel, first of all. It's a legal cartel, which is really strange. You know, cartel is, generally speaking, a bad word, you know, for Americans. You know, we talk about the drug cartels, and that's when you say drug cartel, you don't think of, you know, something that's nice and helping society. You think of violence, you think of drugs, you think of corrupt politicians, you think of, you know, it kind of has all these associations with it. But the banking cartel is a cartel. That's what the Federal Reserve Act created. It created a cartel where the banks could get together and price fix. They could create interest rates that they all, it's price fixing. It'd be like if all the major car companies got together and decided, well, the price of a car, of this type of car, is going to be $40,000, and they all sold it for $40,000, and they coordinated that. Well, that's what the banks do, and the Federal Reserve Act allows them to do that. So obviously this is not libertarian. It's not even American, in the sense of what we believe to be American, but it exists. And, along with the 16th Amendment, the income tax, where the federal government can tax you directly. These things are not part of our founding. In fact, the government said during the founding that there could be no direct tax by the federal government. And yet we have it today. So there's just a lot of things that are supposed to be that are just not. And, it is what it is. We are where we are. Part of it is we allow it. When I say we, I mean me and you. We vote, and there's not enough of us that vote to preserve what was great about America. I know Trump is trying to make America great again, whatever that means, but what made America great is all the things that we had pre-1800, and even Trump is not going back to the 1800s. He's probably not even going back to the 1900s. That would even be an improvement, right? But anyway, I thought this conversation with Jamie Dimon was interesting. I thought it would play some of it and make some comments. It spawned some interesting discussion, and I hope you guys enjoy it. All right, let's go ahead and let's click in here to Jamie Dimon real quick. Oh, I forgot to lock that. Whoops, there we go. Okay, now we can do it.
Finally. Immigration. Another big change in immigration policy. We've essentially gone from a huge amount of unconstrained immigration, which clearly the president ran on countering and has done, but to a United States that is, much, much more skeptical of immigration, both legal and illegal.
Yeah.
Is that good?
So I'm still angry at the Biden administration for what they allowed to happen, okay? And I think it's severely damaged our country. And they say, there's nothing you can do about it. No, Trump comes in, boom, it's closed. God bless them. If countries have to control their borders, or they will cause huge problems. And you have that all over Europe. And it's even worse there because in America, most people coming to America want to be American. They come to work. They can't wait to become a citizen of the United States of America. That's not true for most of the European immigration. I was with President Trump when Trump won, and I said to him, when you get the borders controlled, fix the rest of it. DACA stay, he said, yeah. More merit-based, he said, absolutely. A path to citizenship for hardworking people, absolutely. And, proper asylum. I would urge him to do that. I think he can because he controlled the borders and stuff like that. So, yeah,
Do you see much evidence of that?
Not yet. A little bit in the merit side. You see them talking about it in the merit side and places. And, of course, I don't like what I'm seeing, with 5 grown men beating up little women. Okay, so I think we should calm down a little bit on the internal anger about immigration. And, for those people, I've heard Trump say, even this term, hey, we need these people. They work in our hospitals and our hotels and restaurants and agriculture, and they're good people because we all know them. They are good people, and they should be treated that way.
That's not what you're seeing on the streets of
you know what?
cities.
When I don't, yes, it's not always what you see, and I think rounding up criminals is one thing. I don't have a chart that shows, and this is why I'm a fanatic about detail. Show me who's been rounded up. Are they here legally? Are they criminals? Did they do some law? Did they break American law? But I don't like what I'm seeing. But it's hard for me to tell whether that's just, what the liberal press plays or whether there's more truth to that.
You're beginning to sound quite Trumpy in this. The liberal press.
I'm not Trumpy. I'm a realist, and I like facts and detail, and not binary shit that goes on all the time with.
We can agree on.
I think The Economist is the absolute best, most analytical thing in the world, and you should continue that.
Okay, so he's pumping her up there a little bit at the end, but now what? So let's start at the beginning of what he's talked about being American. Immigration is different than it is in Europe because most of the people that want to come here want to be American. Now, what I would agree about is that that's what we want, right? That's the goal. Is if you come to America, you can be you can still be Italian. You have your Italian heritage, but you want to be American. You want to be here because you want to be free. You want to be here because you want to have free speech. You want to have gun rights. You want to have protection under the law. You want to have a Fourth Amendment and be secure in your papers and things like that, right? Most of these people have come from places where that wasn't the case. And so in that sense, they want to be American. But that's the thing that gets in the way of that. This is the thing I think is lost on a lot of people is most of the time that is what happens. It almost doesn't matter where you come from. But if you come in large numbers, okay, this is like an enablement thing. If we allow the numbers to come in so large, what ends up happening is people can have their own kind of culture, country, community inside of America that interferes with becoming American. You see this in Minnesota with the Somalian community. So many Somalians came in and they all tended to congregate in Minnesota that now there's a portion of Minnesota that's actually just Somalia. Okay, now that's not what we want in our immigration system. We want people to come here and integrate, assimilate with me and you, the European heritage Americans. And we want them to, we don't want to discriminate against their color or their culture or anything like that, but we want them to become American. And becoming American, I think what you see in Minnesota is, or is it Wisconsin? I can't even remember. It's either Minnesota or Wisconsin, wherever the Somalians are that are doing all the graft and stuff. That's not really American, to come in and grift the government out of billions of dollars and then load it up in suitcases and take it back to Somalia or wherever you're from. That's not the purpose of immigration. So that needs to stop, okay? That kind of stuff needs to stop. Now, the best way to do it is to have an immigration system that makes sense. It's merit-based. You're not importing just poor people, okay? We don't want poor people to take care of. We have our own poor people, okay? Why do we want more poor people? We don't want more poor people, okay? We want people that are going to contribute to the vibrancy of the American culture, which is business, which is self-reliance and independence and individual liberty and things like this, right? But, we don't see that. What we see is open the border, let, just massive numbers of people that are mostly poor just walk across the border and then have NGOs enroll them into all kinds of government giveaways, from housing to food to school to whatever. And we're spending way in the trillions of dollars just taking care of other countries' poor people. And that just makes my life harder. It makes your life harder. And, we're really not doing anything for those people. Giving somebody money so they can exist in America the way America is not helping them. So this is really it's like burning money, or, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't really help further the American experiment. Now, the other thing is, I see a lot of criticism right now he didn't talk about this, but I see a lot of this with ICE, okay? And people are criticizing ICE, and they're upset about ICE, and I think some of these protesters are paid, probably. You can call me a cynic or whatever, but I think that's probably what's happening. These NGOs, and which is interesting because most of their money comes from taxpayers. Yes, George Soros creates the Tides Foundation and creates Democracy, whatever. I don't know the different names of the company. They always have names that sound great, but what they actually do is not great. And what you've got, George Soros can stand up an NGO for a couple of $1 million. And then, the government bureaucrats look at it and go, oh, here's an NGO with a couple of $1 million. Well, they must be doing a good thing. Let's give them a couple of $1 billion, and so that money comes from you and me. So yes, George Soros is creating them, but the vast majority of the money that they're operating with comes from taxpayers. And this is just ridiculous, where it's like we're paying for our own destruction. And that has to stop. That's way, way out of hand. And you see this with the ICE situation. Now, I was just watching, the Sunday shows this morning, and I had one of the senators, he was a Democratic senator, but he pointed out that, look, we didn't have all this chaos when Obama was in office, and he deported 2.7 million people, and Trump's only deported about 500,000, And I thought, isn't that interesting? That's an interesting admission, right? Because, yes, that's true. But what was missing from that? We still had ICE. ICE was still going around and rounding up people and deporting them. It's no different than what we have today, okay? The difference is that protesters are being paid because Trump is doing it, and they want to undermine Trump. They don't really care about the success of the country or what it means for the country to deport a bunch of people that shouldn't be here, just like Obama did. So there weren't NGOs paying protesters to protest Obama when he was using ICE to round up illegals, okay? And there's other administrations too. It's not just Obama. Even under Biden, there was a lot of ICE deportations, but there was no protesting. Why? Because they were Democrats. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the Democrats, people on the left, the Democrat thinking part of our body politic, are the ones that drive this conflict, this chaos, and they do it through the NGO system and our taxpayer dollars. They just don't activate it when Democrats are in power. They only activate it when Republicans are in power. And go look into this. This is actually happening. All right. The other thing I would say about immigration, and kind of along the lines of this chaos, is, look, and maybe I just say this like I'm talking to Joe Biden directly. Mr. Biden, President Biden, what did you think was going to happen? If you let 10 million people in and create just a vacuum of taxes that are going to pay for people's free lifestyle, what did you think those of us that have lived here for decades were going to think about that? I mean, eventually, the reason you don't just open the border and let a bunch of people come in is because there'll be a backlash. There'll be regular people that will say, you know what, enough of this. Get these people out of here. And then what you have to remember is the government is just force, okay? The government only knows how to use one tool. They know how to point a gun at you, with a big scary guy with a mask and a vest and, an AK, not an AK-47, but an assault rifle, and force you to do stuff. And so that doesn't look great. That's not a good look. And it looks like chaos, and it looks ugly, and people get trapped up in it, and some people get killed. A lot of people go to jail. And so if you don't want that chaos, then you have to have a border policy that makes sense. So for all these Democrats out there that are just whining and bitching and moaning about what ICE is doing, I would just say to you, then be careful about the policies you sponsor, because you have to remember you have people living here. And to the extent you disrupt their lives, they're going to clamor for you, some sort of backlash. And, so you have to be careful about the policies you implement. They have to make sense in the context of the people that live here. And so I just don't get that they're not making that connection. They somehow see a wide open border is totally separate from ICE, creating chaos in cities and rounding up illegals. Those are linked. Those things are connected to one another, Without one, you don't have the other. And so I think this is just lost on Democrats and people on the left. All right, let's continue with this this interview here.
Absolutely. Well, if we do. We are and we do. Let's talk about one other area, institutions. Attacks on institutions and undermining of independent institutions, the Fed being the obvious one. There has been, and I don't think I'm being, as you would say, too binary on this, there have very clearly been pressure on the Fed. Notably, 10 days ago, the announcement by Chair Powell that he had received a subpoena for a criminal investigation. Yeah. Is that a good idea?
Everyone I know, including President Trump, says we should have an independent Fed is critical. I've never seen anyone actually that's not. Now, they're not completely independent, just so you know. There's two parts to the Fed. One is monetary. That needs to be independent. The other is regulatory. Huge overreach. That's not independent. That's law. And let me finish. I think the things that undercut independence are not good. So I think some of those words, I don't like lawfare. I've had to deal with lawfare my whole life. I mean, going way back, we're constantly being unfairly sometimes, fairly sometimes, but blown out of proportion. I think that undercuts it. So I think, Powell will be gone in 5 months. I think, constant statements is a mistake. And just so you know, the Fed doesn't really set interest rates. Okay, just listen closely to me. What happens if inflation goes up? They raise interest rates. What happens if inflation goes down? They reduce interest rates. They are a fast follower. And if you look at all Fed history, it isn't like they're completely independent. And the last time, and by every American president wants lower rates, but the last time a president jawboned lower rates was Arthur Burns, President Nixon, who had a 60% approval rating when he got elected. Inflation was only 3.5%. It kept on going up. Of course, there was Watergate and the oil crisis, but markets were down 40%. He resigns in disgrace. Inflation and with deficits and deficits are inflationary. With deficits half what they are today, it went for 4%, 5%, 6%, 7%, and you can come up with all the reasons: stronger unions, the oil issues, and all that. But inflation is a bugaboo, and the Fed has to deal with inflation. And that's a judgment of a lot of people, what that means.
But just to be very clear, what we're seeing now is lawfare, and you're against it.
I don't like the courts doing stuff like that. I think they should be very thoughtful about when they pick something up like that.
One of the other policies that...
Okay, before we go into the other policy, the thing I want to say about this, and I think as far as what he said is accurate about the Fed. Okay, the Fed does not set interest rates. Okay, the Fed sets the Fed funds rate. And the Fed funds rate is the rate that banks charge one another to borrow money and what the Fed charges banks to borrow money. Okay? So, again, it's like what I said in the beginning. The Fed is a cartel. And a cartel is like you know how they talk about collusion? They've had the oil companies in front of Congress multiple times, trying to show that they set oil prices. They work together to keep oil prices high and all this kind of stuff. And it's never been proven. The banks do the same thing by law. There is a law that protects the banks to do that. Okay? So I don't know if the oil companies do it or not, but there's no law that allows oil companies to do it. Okay? If they do it, they risk going to jail and breaking the law. The banks do it, and it's perfectly legal because of the Federal Reserve Act. Let's just be clear that the bank operates not in a free market. I mean, this is a monopoly that is allowed to exist. It's a monopoly / cartel that's allowed to exist in the American economy. Okay, and it has a tremendous amount of power. So what's interesting about the Fed is not its independence or lack thereof. That's not the thing that we should care about. Okay? I don't care if the Fed's independent or not. That's not whether it's independent or not is not what causes the damage that the Fed does. What causes the damage is that it's a legal monopoly / cartel that's allowed to fix prices. What prices does it fix? Interest rates. Okay? And it has a monopoly on the issuance of money. And the way it issues that money is it issues it with debt. So it creates debt and money is issued out of that. And we have to pay interest on that money. So it creates money and we pay interest on the money it creates from nothing. Okay? Now, what other business do you know that's like that? Does Procter & Gamble get to make Tide and get all its inputs for free and sell us Tide at 100% profit margin? No. Does Ford Motor Company get all of its parts and its tires and everything that goes into building a car? Does it get all that for free? Or does it get to just create it without spending any money and then get to charge us for cars? No. So the banking system has no cost other than its people and its buildings and things like that. There's no input cost into that. The money that they lend is free to them. It costs them nothing. They just create it. And they create it at our expense, because every time they create another dollar, that's one more dollar that we're trying to fight over to get a share of, right? And if they create trillions of dollars, then we're trying to fight over. When I say we're trying to fight, I mean everybody's trying to make more money, right? But your money that you have to earn is created by the value you create, okay? There is no value that's creating and lending money that is generated out of nothing. The Fed says there is, because, if we have access to capital, then that creates a vibrant economy. Well, that may be, but there is a cost to it. There's this huge debt over here that nobody's looking at. And not only that, but if the Fed is creating money and it's a kind of a political organization and the banking system is political, all of a sudden now the government has extra money that it really shouldn't have. It hasn't taxed from us. It hasn't stolen from me in taxes, hasn't stolen from you in taxes, but it has now all this extra capital. Well, guess what it does? It funds NGOs. It fights wars. Okay? It does all kinds of things that we don't want it to do. Your vote be damned. This is the real problem with the Fed. The Fed, even though technically it's a private bank, it's connected to government in a way that enriches government to do things that government wants to do. Government wants to put 50,000 ICE people on the street and deport people. Well, what does this do? Well, this is, I mean, I don't know if you can see this, but ICE is really unnecessary if you have an immigration system that makes sense. If you have an immigration system that basically says, hey, the border, you can't come into America unless you're invited, okay? And if we catch you here, you're going back. Simple. And you can't just come here and have a child and have that child be an American. By the way, I think that's going to get corrected on the Supreme Court. He talks a little bit about the Supreme Court, but I don't think it'll be until summertime before we see that. But I think the Supreme Court is going to finally consider the words that come after the comma. You know, if you're born here, comma, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, then you're a citizen. But that subject to the jurisdiction thereof has been ignored for decades now, and it's caused a huge problem in our immigration system. But if you had a sensible immigration system, like most countries around the world have, you wouldn't need 50,000 ICE agents. You might not even need ICE at all. Or if you didn't have fiat money flowing into programs that funded illegals' housing cost and their food cost and their transportation cost and who knows what, medical cost, their education cost. I mean, essentially you can come here as an illegal and live like somebody that makes $75,000 a year. And you and I pay for it. Okay? That's the craziness that is our immigration system. And in that type of craziness, you have to have 50,000 ICE agents. Okay? But if you had a legitimate immigration system, one that didn't promote chain migration and all this kind of crazy stuff, you wouldn't need 50,000 ICE agents. So look, the government, breaks your leg and then offers you a crutch. That's just what it does. And I don't know, man. The best way to get rid of all this is just to end the Fed so that the easy money that the government has access to goes from, a raging river to a trickling stream. And now they have to tax us. I think that's the best way to deal with it. And that's why I'm always advocating for honest money on this program is because honest money is more dear to everybody. It's more dear to the government. It's more dear to the people who have to earn it. So think of the government as having to earn it, having to earn the right to exist through our vote. Okay, if we disagree with them about something they're spending money on, and they can't tax it from us, there's nowhere else for the government to get money. It doesn't make anything. It doesn't sell anything. It doesn't have anything. It only has what it can take from us. That's it. Now, in our current government, they also have what they can borrow. And there's no real pain associated with that. So people aren't in the street upset that the debt ceiling is going up by another $1 trillion or $5 trillion or whatever. But I guarantee you, if they were taking money out of your paycheck, there would be people in the street because people have to make their lives work. And it's hard to make your life work when the government's stealing so much of your livelihood. All right, let's continue here.
The president announced recently.
But this has been going on my whole life, too. So this isn't just President Trump.
I get that.
Okay? So let's be clear about, DOJ overreach. It's been consistent now for 20 years. And, in the old days, the DOJ would step into something when it was referred to them by, either civil or criminal. Now they just read the paper and step in. And that's the mistake. Because, to them, they're a hammer. To them, everything's a nail. And
one of President Trump's recent proposals.
Oh, okay, wait, real quick. He said something important, that the DOJ is a hammer, to everything them is a nail. This is the government in general, okay? Government in general, think of the hammer as just force, okay? It's coercion. It's, hey, here's a gun, I'm pointing at you, you can be shot or you can go to jail. That's the hammer, okay? That's what government has. And there are some laws that are legitimate that we want the government to use the hammer for. If you murder somebody, we want the government to come in with a hammer and put a stop to that. Okay? That's, or if you're a rapist, we want the government to come in and use a hammer to put a stop to that. We don't want the government to come in and interfere with what businesses are doing, what they see is best for their shareholders, for their company as a whole. We don't want them interfering with that. We don't want them interfering with things. It's just that, when you have this largesse, you have this massive government with these thousands and thousands of agents, departments and agencies and all this stuff. They're also running around trying to justify their existence. And they look at the law, like you said, they read the paper. They don't even have to wait till a law is broken. They can just read the paper about something they don't like and then go bring the hammer. And you know what? We don't want the government saying, what they like or don't like about what we as Americans do. If I do something and I create a conflict with another American, they can sue me in court, okay? Or they can call the police, and if I broke some law, I can go to jail. We don't need bureaucrats, trying to dream up things. I mean, we see this a lot with Trump. I mean, everything that's bad about America, you see a lot with Trump. Every kind of executive order he comes out with, every kind of policy he wants to create, they run to the courts and they interfere with it. They stop it while it makes its way through the courts. And of course, the courts are slow. And in the meantime, his administration is handcuffed. But that's not really the way the government's supposed to work. The government, the way traditionally court cases work their way to the Supreme Court is an individual would have to be impacted somehow. Like, I don't know, just any kind of Supreme Court case. If I get sued and I disagree, okay, and somebody cites some law or some act of Congress or something, and I get sued, I can appeal it. And that's called having standing. Like, I can't just go sue somebody for no reason. I have to have standing. I have to have a reason. And the court can always come in and say that either that's not a good reason or you don't really have a reason. That's a made-up reason. But these agencies have been able to come in and just always exert standing, even though they have no skin in the game. So it'd be like there's a football game going on, okay? And the referees are calling the game or whatever, and you're a person sitting in the stands, okay? and you come in and you just start playing in the game. Well, you have no standing, okay? Your place is in the stands, not out on the field. It's the same kind of deal. And these agencies have just been able to run amok through the court system and just exercise standing where they actually have no standing. And so this is part of the problem with our court system. And I think that's going to get rectified as well by the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of things kind of going through the Supreme Court, and the court is going to change dramatically during the Trump administration. Some things will be good, some things maybe not so good, but there's going to be a lot of changes because it's been broken for a long time and needs to be fixed. All right, let's continue.
That would directly affect you. He's doing it to improve affordability, is to impose a 10% cap on credit card rates. Is that a bad idea?
It would be an economic disaster. And I'm not making up because our business, we would survive it, by the way. You would, if you, in the worst case, you'd have to have a drastic reduction of the credit card business. I mean drastic. I mean like 10%. I mean like 80%. It would remove credit from 80% of Americans, and that is their backup credit. But I have a great idea. Since there's a huge disagreement on this one, between Republicans and Democrats, I think we should test it. And I can't do this, because it'd be antitrust. But the government can do it. They should force all the banks to do it in 2 states, Vermont and Massachusetts, and see what happens. and then I think the left will learn everyone who thinks manipulating price will learn a real lesson. And the people crying the most won't be the credit card companies. It'll be the restaurants, the retailers, the travel companies, the schools, the municipalities, because people will miss their water payments, their this payment and that payment. It would be something else to watch. I think they should test it.
President Trump may be determined to test it more broadly.
Well, then, okay, whatever it is, we'll deal with it. I think it's wrong for the government to get involved extensively in pricing of stuff, but I got to deal with the world I got.
It's kind of interesting.
We're going to give them, at one point, real analysis on the effects of this. We've given some, but not a lot.
It's kind of interesting. When I ask you something that directly affects JP Morgan, you say it will be a complete economic disaster.
No,
when I speak more broadly about
not
geopolitics, you're very reluctant to criticize the president.
First of all, one I know exactly. The other one is more qualitative, how it's going to work, what are the pieces, what's their intent, how are people going to respond. They're not the same thing. But the economic, when you believe something to be true, you should say that. And so the economic of the card thing, we'll see.
Do you think CEOs...
But the other thing, I've not seen anyone, really, Republicans, senators, businesses, banks, credit unions, community banks, anyone think it's a good idea.
Do you think it is...
This is one of the things I like about Jamie Dimon. I don't necessarily like his answers, but he answers, my perception is he answers honestly, the way he believes, what he believes in. And just for the record, I think what would happen if you somehow put a cap on credit is just what he said. There would be less credit. Now, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? I think a lot of people use credit cards for convenience. I know I do. If I go to a restaurant, I pay with a credit card. And then at the end of the month, when my bill comes due, I pay it. I pay the whole thing. A lot of people don't do that. Some people, let the interest run, which I think is a bad idea. But I think if you came in and said, okay, the cap, first of all, setting ceilings and floors on pricing, which is essentially what you're doing there, same thing the Fed does, okay? When you set a ceiling or you set a floor on some price, and an interest rate is just a price, okay? There are dislocations that happen in the market. Why does that happen? Why are there dislocations? Why does that disrupt the market? Well, because prices are information, okay? And the way we all operate in the market is we look at prices, and that tells us the best way that we should do certain things, okay? If those prices are artificially lower or they're artificially higher, that changes the way you make decisions in the market, okay? Now, most people don't even realize they're doing this kind of stuff, but I just give you an example. If the government sets a floor on the price of milk, okay, and it sets that floor too high, some people are going to choose not to buy milk, okay? And maybe we need milk. I mean, I don't want to get into the biological part of it, but maybe you need it for your bones, or, children need it, or, you can start having calcium deficiency or something like that. But bottom line is if the price of milk is too high because we're trying to protect the farmers, that produce the milk, then what's going to happen is there's going to be fewer farmers producing milk. That's just the way it is. You just crowd out. There's only a certain number of them that are going to be able to survive under that pricing condition. And so by the same token, is if you lower the threshold of interest that you can charge individuals, what's going to happen is a whole bunch of people that are used to using credit cards are going to be excluded from the market. They're going to have to start using cash. Now, maybe that from a libertarian's perspective, that might end up being a good thing, because part of the problem with our society, our financial system, is too many people are using credit cards, and too many people, cash is a more, think of cash as being like incognito, right? You can operate in the economy with cash and nobody knows what you're buying. They don't know how much of what you're buying. You know, they don't know you. They can't link you with the transaction. But with a credit card, they can, because all these banking transactions are collected and they're analyzed and all this kind of stuff. And so this is like a digital currency would be like an extreme case of this. Like if you had a CBDC, now everything that I buy can be tracked and linked to me directly. And so there's like a philosophical thing there. Is that freedom? Is that liberty? You know, cash is more freedom than, say, credit. Okay, because credit connects you, the individual, your name, your social security number, whatever, with what you're spending. Whereas cash doesn't. So cash is actually, you know, more libertarian, more free, more liberty-based. And all these efforts to get rid of cash are designed to do that. They always give you the reasoning they always give is, well, you know, most people just use cash for dealing drugs. And okay, yeah, maybe. Or that same argument they have for Bitcoin. Well, because we can't see these transactions, you know, there's a lot of crime that's being committed. According to you, the government, maybe not. Maybe these aren't real crimes. Maybe these are just crimes that you say are crimes, but we the people don't believe they're crimes. For example, if I wanted to buy a bunch of cocaine and snort it, which I don't do, but if I wanted to do that, and I've analyzed it and I've decided, you know what, that's not that big of a health hazard, and it provides a lot of enjoyment for me, but you, the government, you say that's illegal, and I can go to jail for doing that. Maybe I disagree, okay? So maybe that's a good reason to have Bitcoin or cash, right? So this is just, I mean, I know we're getting off on a tangent here a little bit, but the bottom line is anytime the government gets control of setting prices, whether they're trying to keep prices low, so price controls on the low side, or they're trying to set floors or ceilings with respect to what the market discovery price is, that's bad, because that creates some dislocation in the market. And we don't always know what the fallout is from these dislocations. That's why the financial system is so damaging to our market. We can theorize what's wrong, you know, like right now we see the job market is kind of, what are we learning? You know, technology's like, we're the most advanced technologically than we've been ever, okay? And there should be just jobs everywhere, but there's not jobs everywhere. Why? Maybe it has something to do with the fiat money system, right? You're stealing people's productivity to the point where, you know, more and more opportunities can't be created. You know, maybe customers would go out and get massages. I say customers, Americans. Maybe Americans would go out and get massages, for example, more often if they had more disposable income. But they don't have more disposable income because the government's constantly printing money. And the money they're printing is crowding out their ability to grow their productivity and expand their quality of life by going and getting massages. That's bad for the massage, you know, envies of the world, Massage Envy and other companies like that. Or maybe Americans would travel more. Maybe the travel industry is down because disposable income is down. Disposable income is down because we're printing too much money and people's productivity has been stolen from them. So these dislocations happen and they cost jobs, they cost people's livelihood and productivity. This is why you don't want market dislocations. And the biggest market dislocation of them all is the Federal Reserve, is the fiat money system, the banking system, the way it is today. I don't have anything against banking, but if you're going to loan somebody money, you need to have the money. Okay, the money needs to be in your possession. And then you transfer that money to that person and you get a contract, right? But the bank doesn't do that. The bank creates a loan, and when they create the loan, that's what creates the money that goes to the home builder or car dealer or whatever. Okay, that money doesn't exist in the vault. It doesn't exist in the bank drawers. It doesn't exist at the bank's headquarters. It doesn't exist at all anywhere within the bank. Okay. and so think about that. You know, if I'm a bank and I loan somebody $100,000 that I don't actually have, and I charge them 5% interest, what am I charging them interest on? What's the real rate of return? Infinity. You know, if you think about that, I mean, let's just say they have to keep $1 in reserve to loan $100,000. I mean, that interest rate, the real interest rate, is 5% on $100,000, which is $5,000. But now I'm charging $5,000 for, I only had to really give away, or I had to transfer $1 to the person that was buying something. So that I'm charging $5,000 on interest, $5,000 worth of interest on $1 loaned, not $100,000, because they didn't have $100,000 to loan in the first place. So this is just very corrupt, and most people don't understand it, but it creates huge dislocations in the market. And it's directly related to the number of opportunities that you and your family see in the economy, and how you earn your money, and then how you spend that money in the economy, what's available to you at what prices. And this is something we all need to be more aware of. All right, let's continue here.
But it goes back to this thing about, this word affordability. Of course we want affordability. The Democrats don't want affordability. What we've screwed up as a nation is bad policy around housing, mortgages, affordability, health, immigration. We've messed up so many policies, which I write about. It's time to fix them, and I think the Economist can help do that, because you guys are really smart people. And so, and we constantly have this economic policy that we don't think it through. We've driven half the companies out of the public markets. What are we doing? Why did that happen? And then we just can't deal with reality anymore as a people, because we want a simple answer to everything. And so,
when you tot up all the things we've been talking about, the president's policies, both geopolitically and economically, and the tech change that we're...
Let me just, before they get into that, I 100% agree. I mean, what are we doing? Why have we turned over so much power to this government? Now, Jamie Dimon, he's not going to talk about, what I just talked about, because that affects him and his ability to earn $30 million a year, or whatever he earns. But he's a big part of the problem. But he can't fix it because he's inside of it. It's the fish in the water, right? Jamie Dimon knows. He knows all this stuff that I just told you. It's not like he's ignorant of all this. But that's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. He's not going to talk about that. But all these downstream effects of his business create all these problems. And it's like whack-a-mole. Once you distort the money, it creates all these downstream issues. And the government, we empower the government to go fight all those issues. And it's like whack-a-mole. So the more dislocations we have in the market, the more problems that are created, the more they run around with their hammer trying to stamp them out. And this does look a little bit chaotic. I mean, you're looking at it going, what the hell are we doing? But it's all related to the upstream root cause, or what I call linchpin, which is the dishonest money. The fact that Jamie Dimon's business allows him to create money that everybody has to use as a measuring stick, okay? I use the money in my account as a measuring stick on what we can afford and what we can't afford, okay? My company that I'm employed by, they use that money as a measuring stick of what they make and how much they make and who they sell it to. But Jamie Dimon gets that money and it doesn't cost him anything. Now, does that seem right? Can you see how that's dishonest? All he has to do is loan it into existence. And in his business, he gets a steady stream of income for loans that he makes that he doesn't actually have the money for. Okay? Now, maybe one person in 100 understands that about the banking industry. But I can just promise you, this has almost every problem you can think about is related to this problem. This is why it's so important. And my generation, look, I think we're done. People with gray hair like me and people older than me, forget about it. They're never going to solve this problem. Okay? It's going to have to be our kids' generation, the 30-somethings, the 20-somethings out there. They're the ones that are going to solve this problem. My generation is done. They got money in their 401k. They own their house. They're not looking to upset the apple cart. Okay? So it's going to have to be the young people. And the older people than me are even worse because they have their health care paid for and their retirement is paid for. And all this just doesn't exist in a real money system. Okay? I can't say it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in its current form. Maybe there's some other iteration of it or something, but not in its current form. All right, let's continue.
Living through. Do you think the U.S. economy is, on balance, in better shape or worse shape?
You know, it's been hugely resilient. It's in pretty good shape. You're going to have a lot of stimulus early in this year, so you're going to, and multiple forms of it, from the one big beautiful bill to what they're doing with student lending to, some of the mortgage purchasing they're doing, deregulation of banks, which is real, deregulation, which feeds animal spirits. Our economy is so large and so integrated and so complex, and it's hard to always tell, but the innovation is unbelievable. You take a trip to Silicon Valley and look at these companies, it blows you away. The brain power going to fixing things and curing cancer and fixing machines. And so I think it's great. So you talk about economic policy. I think what government should be focused more on is policy conducive to growth. And then, of course, you have policies that help the old, the sick, the aged, et cetera. And we don't even do good in that in a lot of cases. So I think we could do a better job making the economy work for everybody. And it is a little bit of this K economy now. We do see that where, the upper income are doing far better. They got houses and stocks, and the lower side, they're back to normal, which is they don't have enough of a rainy day fund. Jobs are getting a little harder to get. Incomes have stopped growing a little bit. And we're quite conscious of that. And I think there are things we can do. Like, for example, and we've done analysis, I would double the earned income tax credit. I would give people working more money as a negative tax. So you're making $14,000, you get a check from the government at $12,000. I get rid of the child requirement. Then you're giving it to the people who actually use it to further their lives, spend in their communities, take care of their kids, as opposed to government dictating, how you spend money on every little thing you do. And so I think there are real fixes that make society work better for everybody. And
would you raise taxes to pay for that?
I don't think you'd have to. I think it would drive a lot of growth. I think I did the numbers at one point, it'd be $60 billion of spending. I think it would probably create more than that of growth and taxes. And if you have to raise taxes a little bit, that's fine. But again, I don't want to have the binary argument. I don't know anyone, okay, and you guys in the room, might be Democrats, Republicans, who thinks that sending another $1 trillion to Washington, D.C. will actually improve anything. So when you say raise taxes, if you said raise taxes and directly give it to the people who need it, I'd do it.
Okay. So some interesting stuff there. What he started off talking about, is the economy good or is it bad or whatever? And he kind of didn't say. He said it was resilient. And, he talked about Silicon Valley. The truth is about America is a very productive group of people. That's what America is. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It has to do with individual liberty. It mostly has to do with property rights. The fact that we can own our property and decide how to use it, that's a huge deal. Huge deal. Most countries, you look at Israel. I mean, we've talked about Israel some. In Israel, there is no private property. Okay, the government owns every piece of land in Israel, and you lease it from the government. It's just hard to generate wealth over time if you don't own anything, especially in a fiat system. Okay, so ownership of property rights are a huge reason for why this government, in spite of all, this country, in spite of all the largesse around government, a lot of the financial repression that we have with our banking system, in spite of all that, we're still a very productive nation. The real problem with America is the competitiveness, okay? Because of the way, our banking system is, the fact that the dollar is the reserve currency and things like that creates an imbalance with the world that really is not working in our favor. And again, that's another reason to get rid of the Fed. There are people, it's almost like you can think of it like this. There are people that have to work for money, and then there are people that are just connected to this stream of fiat money. And the big problem in America is we have too many people whose jobs are connected either directly or indirectly to the stream of fiat money. And that keeps us from getting away from fiat money. But the reality is, if you could get us away from fiat money, in the soup that is American productivity and innovativeness, he talks about Silicon Valley and how innovative it is and all this mixture of property rights and innovation and productivity. And, if you look at all the great businesses that exist in the world, a whole huge bunch of them come from America. And we've talked about this before, that's directly related to things like property rights and individual liberty. But it just seems like as time goes on, the banking system, the way government is, its policies, it's constantly, those things are constantly under attack. And if we ever lose some of those things, we're really going to be in big trouble. We're really going to be in big trouble. The resiliency of the economy is in spite of these things I'm talking about. Like, in spite of our fiat money system, we have a very resilient economy. Okay? But if you look at stuff like the stock market, how much of the stock market going up is real productivity versus, let's say, just fiat money? I don't know. That's a great question. If you look at the value of the market divided by gold, instead of the market being at all-time highs, it's actually about down 50%. In other words, you take the Dow Jones or the S&P and you divide by the price of gold, say 2000. 2000 was essentially peak prosperity for Americans. In other words, your money never went further and bought more for you than it did in 2000. Ever since then, we've been in decline. Ever since then, your money actually buys less every year. And, most of you listening, you probably feel that. Certainly in the last 10 years, you feel that. And you can see this by just taking the value of the S&P 500 and divide it by gold in 2000, and then take the value of the S&P 500 and divide by gold today. And what you'll see is that it used to take 40 ounces of gold to buy the S&P 500 in 2000, and now you can buy the S&P 500 with like 12 ounces of gold. So what's more valuable, 40 ounces of gold or 12 ounces of gold? That's the way you look at it. Obviously, 40 ounces of gold, if you go back 1,000 years, 40 ounces of gold would buy you more than 12 ounces of gold. Okay, that's the way you look at it. At some point, this is going to become obvious to everyone, okay? But, do we really want to wait for that point? I mean, do we want to really wait until we're all rolling around with wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk? No. We need to be able to see this now and get rid of it now before it really just throws us into the ditch permanently. And you're just never going to get this kind of analysis from a banker like Jamie Dimon. Even though Jamie Dimon is very smart, and even though he answers very honestly, he's like that fish in the water that you're asking about. How's the water? How's the fiat money system, Jamie Dimon? What fiat money system? I mean, technically he does know what the fiat money system is, but his worldview just exists inside of a fiat money system. All right, my camera just messed up. See if I can get it back to focus. There we go. I don't know. Hopefully I'm rambling a little bit, but hopefully this rambling is making some sense. All right, we got a little bit more Jamie Dimon, and then we'll wrap up.
No,
so
but
we
that's not what happens.
are running out of time.
It goes to all these interest groups, and they give it to their friends and all that, and which is why the people are considered a swamp. It's kind of a swamp. There's 17,000 lobbying groups, but bank companies are guilty too. They're just fighting for their one self-interest as opposed to what's good for my country. But that's what happens in Congress. And you see how these bills get spent. Like the CHIPS Act was a good idea until. It had to be unions, place-based, child care, diapers. What the hell are we doing? And we do it over and over, and then it fails, and then we spend more money because the problem is we didn't spend enough money.
So you're a man with many strong opinions. We've
Yes.
heard that in the last few minutes. Man, not afraid to tell us about those opinions. But I was struck when we were talking about President Trump. You were very careful. And you are one of the more outspoken. Let me finish. Well, you are one of the more outspoken business leaders. I'm genuinely struck by the unwillingness of CEOs in America to say anything critical. There is a climate of fear in your country. Would you agree with that? And what should be done about it?
This is the Davos intellectual elite. I've been coming to Davos all these years and listening to chatter and stuff like that. He didn't do a particularly good job making the world a better place. I think it's great we get together and talk. And what you want me to do, this is.
I want you to answer my question.
Want
it's not
one
hard.
headline that gets razzed up.
No, I don't.
A million different
Jamie, that's not true. I'm genuine. I've asked you this question off camera.
I've made it clear. I want a stronger NATO, a stronger Europe. Some of the things Trump has done are causing that. Some are not. I'm not a tariff guy, though I'd use it in the 8 cases I had. I think they should change their approach to immigration. I've said it. What the hell else do you want me to say?
Is there a climate of fear?
I think that is completely clear. Hey, ready? Here's your headline. I'm a globalist.
I'm not looking for a headline. I'm trying.
Okay, with that, I think we'll stop the interview. But what that last part's all about is just I think he's right. They're just looking for a headline. People don't like Trump, okay? There's a number of reasons for that, but people don't like him, and they don't like what he's doing. And, the media wants more criticism. They want people like Jamie Dimon to criticize him. And Jamie Dimon, I think, is criticizing some things that he feels like he knows a lot about. But a lot of this is just, staying in her lane. Jamie Dimon doesn't know everything, and he may have opinions, but these are opinions that may be founded in some sort of bias that he knows that he probably has. And it's not always appropriate for someone like Jamie Dimon to comment on everything. So a lot of this is just staying in your lane. But notice he had strong comments about setting interest rates on credit cards. Why? Because he knows about that. And he said that. He said, look, some of this is just stuff I know very well. And so I'm going to comment strongly. And some of this other stuff is stuff that I don't know as well. And so I'm not going to comment as strongly. I think the bigger thing is Jamie Dimon probably doesn't believe that his industry is culpable for as many things as it is culpable for. That's the biggest part. He thinks, the banking system is critical to the health of the U.S. economy. And what is the U.S. economy? The U.S. economy is just people putting their labor and their technology into action to create something. And then to the extent they create more than what they need, they trade away the difference. And you just multiply this by millions and millions. And that's what the U.S. economy is. That's what the global economy is. Now, of course, there are, if you kind of distill all this back to the man on the desert island and all this kind of stuff, initially what you had to do is you had to save money. Okay. Like if I lived on an island and I caught one fish every day to sustain my life, if I wanted to catch more fish, I had to essentially either go without fish for a day or catch 2 fish in one day and then spend the extra day that I didn't have to catch another fish making a net. And then once I caught a net, I could catch more fish. Okay, notice that's savings. But savings and debt are not the same thing. And what's happened in our financial system is we say that we need the banking system because businesses need capital. Well, why do they need capital? Well, they need capital so they can invest and grow their business. But what a lot of people don't realize is 100 years ago, the way businesses got capital is they just saved money, okay? Because the money wasn't being undermined 100% of the time. And so they could just save money on their balance sheet, and then when they had enough, they would buy a machine, okay? They didn't need the bank, okay? So the way an economy works is you have to save money and then invest. You save and invest, but what we've turned it into is borrow and invest. And yeah, if you're going to have an economy that borrows and invests, then the banking system is more important. But there should be a lot fewer things that we have to borrow money for. Most people should just be able to save their money and buy a car, save their money and at least have the down payment for a house. But what we've gotten to now is everything's borrowed. I mean, even you go buy a new refrigerator. You pay for it over the next 24 months. You don't save the money. Why? Why don't we save the money? The reason we don't save the money is because the money is devaluing so fast that saving doesn't make any sense. And that is a big problem. Okay? The reason it's a big problem is think about the guy who's, working at Subway. And if you work at Subway, I'm not trying to offend you personally. I'm just trying to situate a particular level of sophistication with a certain job type. So somebody that works at Subway probably doesn't know that money in the future is worth less than money today in our current system. And so they don't understand that whatever their wage is constantly being stolen from them, okay? And moved upward to the people that are shorting the currency and borrowing money and things like that. But this is fundamental to why the person at Subway can barely make their life work. Not only do they not have enough to save, they don't even have enough they can't even provide enough income out of that job to live in a house or buy a car, okay? And so this is the mechanism that robs us over time. Now eventually it'll rob everybody, even the really wealthy people, okay? Because that's just what it does. But to the extent you can outrun it, you can outrun inflation either through your ability to earn a higher income or your ability to invest, save and invest, like Warren Buffett. That's what Warren Buffett did. Warren Buffett doesn't make anything. He saved and he invested. He saved and he invested. And he did it over and over and over again. And now his investments throw off so much money that he doesn't need income. Okay, it's like an endowment or whatever. Okay, but the person that works at Subway or the person that works at the local hardware store, they can't make enough to even buy the things they need, much less save and invest. Okay, and that mechanism will continue to work its way up the income line until it starts getting people that make $100,000 a year and $200,000 a year and then $500,000 a year. And so this is why it's so important to get rid of this system. The system eventually will come for everyone, even the major corporations. And so anyway, again, I think I'll just wrap up with I like Jamie Dimon. I think he is a very direct person on things that he has strong opinions about. And there's other things that he just recognizes that he doesn't have a strong opinion about. I like what he said about Davos. I mean, they've been coming to Davos for years and chit-chatting. But what have you done to make the world a better place? Not much. Not much is the answer to that question. And he's absolutely right about that. But these people just love, these elites just love to get together and chit-chat with one another and think they're solving problems when they're not actually solving problems. In fact, Jamie Dimon, and I think on some level he knows this, he's part of the problem. He's a big part of the problem. Okay, the money center banks are a big part of the problem that we're experiencing in the U.S. economy. Now, I think he's right about what the hell are we doing? You know, we have this CHIPS Act, and then all the connected people come out of the woodwork and start to make their claim, and we have 17,000 lobbyist organizations that lobby Congress. I think all this is bad, obviously. But I think a lot of it just would not exist with an honest money system. That's just, I think you can logically, praxeologically think your way back to that single linchpin. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thanks for coming in, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you're listening only, go pull the show up on YouTube, please. Watch it, give it a like and subscribe. That helps the algorithm. And then share the show if you're so inclined. I think these are real important. I think my generation's done. We're not gonna solve these problems. We're too much in the tank. We're too much in this Republican Democrat dichotomy. We still think the government somehow can save us or whatever, and I just think we're done. You know, my generation and above is done. I think if you're 20-something, you got to fix this problem. If you're 30-something, you can be a part of the solution. If you're 40 on your way to 50, you're probably, don't even know what the hell I'm talking about. And you probably need to go to Mises.org and study and read and listen to more of Who Gets to Decide. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming in. Peace.